Hello and welcome to week 2 of Introduction to Healthcare and Business Analytics. In this week's session, we'll talk about a number of things. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about why analytics has fallen short in many organizations in terms of how different organizations have been able to take full advantage of data and analytics. We'll talk about how you go about looking at analytics from a maturity standpoint. Is an organization really set up on a systemic and holistic way to be able to take full advantage of data and analytics and use data as a strategic asset? And as a part of that, we'll talk a lot about data quality, and this is something that I harp on a lot in terms of if you don't have good handle on your data and your data quality, how can you really make valid decisions with it? We'll talk about the 5 major types of analytics, as has often been talked about out there. Some of which you undoubtedly see all the time, and some of which you may see and not even realize that you're actually seeing it. And then I'll also describe some various use cases that are out there within analytics that can be used both within healthcare and within the business environment. So first of all, I want to talk a bit about why analytics has fallen short. Now, a lot of information that we have here comes out of healthcare, but it is also applicable to the community at large in terms of how it makes use of analytics. This was a survey I saw last year that was conducted by the Healthcare Information Management Systems Society, otherwise known as HIMSS. And this was a survey of senior healthcare leaders, and it was really quite informative. First of all, what they found was a lack of standardization. Health systems use an average of 4 different analytics tools. And in the places I've worked with, I actually find that to be a bit of an understatement. There are different silos, have their own tools, have their own systems, have their own people running them, and you have multiple sources of truth. We have multiple systems, and it can be very, very difficult to make any kind of sense out of the noise that's all generated. There's a lack of consistency. Only 25% of healthcare organizations are able to utilize analytics throughout their entire system. So you may have a system rolled out and finally polished in, say, your electronic medical record system, but the finance systems don't have anything in place, the billing systems don't have any in place, the customer relations systems don't have anything in place, or the supply chain systems or anything like that. Or you'll have there is a lack of consistency in many areas. Also within business in general, this story is also very, very similar. You'll have some areas are covered very, very well, some areas not so well. There's a lack of execution. Most systems claim to have an analytics strategy, yet only 1/3 of those actually have implemented that strategy. I've talked with a number of senior leaders in healthcare, and I asked them, do you have a strategy for analytics? And they say, oh yeah, sure we do. And then you start digging into them a little bit more in terms of what they're actually doing and how they're doing it. And then everybody on the conversation soon realizes that they're kind of nowhere when it comes to these kinds of things. I've done assessments for large teaching hospital systems of their capacity for data and analytics, and in some cases the assessment was pretty short because they turned to me and said, "Yeah, we know we don't have anything. We know that we're really at a very, very basic level," and it makes the conversation in some ways easier because you can talk about improvements and moving them forward. And then finally, in the healthcare side, there's a lack of clinical acceptance. Clinicians are the least likely stakeholders within healthcare to utilize analytics for decision making, which in my mind is actually kind of shocking because those are the people who are dealing with people. They're dealing with real life patients and real life situations. And we'll talk a bit about the many situations where clinicians, people closest to the patient, are going to want to have that analytics at their disposal to help them with making timely decisions on behalf of patients. There are many potential bad things that can happen within a healthcare organization if people don't have timely access to data. So data integrity is a very critical component, and there's a little bit here about what is right and what is wrong as far as data integrity. So what does wrong look like? It's when you don't have a source of truth. Now, what is a source of truth? It is where you know where you need to go for a source of data. I talked a little bit last week about master data management and master data elements. This is a component of that. Do you know where to go for patient information? Do you know where to go for customer information? Do you know where to go for product information? If you're General Mills and you make flour, do you know how much you're selling in terms of various quantities? Are you selling by the bag? Are you selling by the pallet? I talked with an organization that was doing something very similar to that, and they didn't have a good handle on it. You get what's wrong is you get reports that are inaccurate or inconsistent. A lot of times reports are someone will sit at a computer, pull out data out of some source system, manipulate it by hand, fold it, spindle it, mutilate it, put it out the other end, and then hope that it's consistent with the same report they ran last month. These reports are also looking backwards. You're telling them something that would have happened, that it's already happened, not before they have a chance to actually affect what's happened. They're difficult to visualize. You can't necessarily see patterns. You can't see changes over time. You can't see seasonality. So there's issues there. There are poor quality. There are metrics that are inconsistent or poorly defined. They're not sourced and they're not used. Now, what does right look like? Well, right is when everybody knows what the source of truth is, where the reports are accurate, where they are easily visualized, where you can see at your fingertips. You can see if something is worth your attention in terms of getting into. Are you getting any kind of a signal of something that you should either an opportunity you should take advantage of or a threat you should avoid? Do they have good quality? Are they sourced? Are they used by all? Is everybody speaking from the same page of music? And this is something I found a while ago, which I think is very, very true. Poor data quality is ultimately like dirt on your windshield. And you may be how many of us have driven with a dirty windshield? I know I have. We're coming into snow season here from where I'm making this recording. We're going to be coming into winter here in New England. We've all driven with snow on the windshield, with ice on the windshield. You may be able to see where you're going. It may get you there, but there's going to be some point where you're going to run into something that you don't want to run into, or you're going to miss something you should have missed. The same holds true with data quality. Poor data quality is like dirt or snow or ice on your windshield. It is not going to allow you to see the full breadth of potential opportunities and threats that are out there. So I want to talk a little bit here about analytics maturity and what do I mean by that? And this is looking at adoption of analytics on the part of an entire organization, and this is what is used. Now, I've been in the consulting business for a while, so this is consulting speak. Those of you who may have been exposed to this may have seen things like this. This is called a maturity model. And what you have here is that an organization across multiple dimensions can be rated as either foundational, meaning they're at the very beginning of maturity, they're just figuring things out, things are very, very ad hoc, things are siloed and split apart amongst different parts of the organization. That is foundational. So you have some beginnings of recognition for analytics, but it's at a very, very early stage. Then you have leading, and that is when you start to see an organization start to get a handle on where it is from its data and its data as an asset perspective. You have staff unified under who are responsible for data. They're starting to work. They're starting to be unified. They're starting to work together. You have what's called data governance put into place, where you have a data governance council, which has a charter, which has a set of scope and responsibility, which is essential for it. And you have a data stewardship component within an organization where people who are in the business units of an organization are responsible for and are taking responsibility for the application and use of their data. And then finally, you have transformational, and this is when an organization has sufficient handle on its data and on the data that it's responsible for, that it's able to use its data as a strategic asset to where it starts to take advantage of some more advanced analytics, which I'll get into, such as predictive and prescriptive and cognitive analytics, because they have enough trust in what their data is telling them to be able to use it to get to that kind of next level. So and And from this, again, this is focused on the healthcare environment, but this also applies to the general business environment. So organizations that would be considered at a leading level of analytics, at least organizations that I've been in contact with, include University of North Carolina Health System, University of New Mexico, organizations that would be considered transformational, who are really cutting edge in this field, would be Duke Health System down in North Carolina, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in Pennsylvania, and Ochsner Medical Center. So these are organizations that have really made a lot of strides in that area. Now, I talked a little bit about predictive and prescriptive analytics. That is a type of analytics. So let's talk a little bit about that and how those actually work. So there are 5 major types of analytics, and they each refer to a different activity or component. The first is called descriptive analytics, otherwise which I call oversight, because it's looking backwards on things that have already happened. Then you have diagnostic analytics, also known as hindsight, where it's looking backwards, but it's giving you more information in terms of cause and effect of different things that might be happening. The next on the progression is called predictive analytics. Predictive analytics, or foresight, is where you are getting information from your data where you may be able to predict an event that may happen in the future. And the important thing about that is that if you are able to predict a future event based upon the data that you have in the present, then you are better able as an organization to either not have that event happen, which if it is a threat that you are trying to avoid, or take advantage of that event if you believe it is an opportunity you wish to take advantage of. And we'll talk a little bit about each one of those. Then there is what's called prescriptive analytics, or insight, where you have the systems are not only potentially advising you of potential opportunities or threats, but they're also giving you more specific recommendations as to how to respond to those opportunities or threats. This is getting into some of the foundations of both data science and artificial intelligence. Finally, we have what's called cognitive analytics, which is where an organization the system will take action itself to respond to circumstances and be able to help an organization make a adjustment that needs to be made. Again, this is moving into the artificial intelligence realm, and some of these also pull up some interesting ethical questions as well in terms of when a computer should actually be making decisions or not. So let's talk about some of these different types of analytics. First of all, we have descriptive analytics. This is by far and away the most common type of analytics. And anybody who has looked at a report on a screen or a report on a piece of paper, in all likelihood, that is descriptive analytics. So an example of that would be your total gross sales for the last 3 months, your total patient census in your hospital by floor for the last 3 weeks. Your numbers of patients in your number of patients in cardiac observation in the last 3 weeks. So these are all examples of descriptive analytics. They are by nature they are historical. They are a snapshot. They're taken at some point in time. And they're usually done in some trending over time to give you some degree of historical context. Now this is, I believe, between 85 and 90% really of all reports coming out of all analytics in most organizations, and because it's what you've all seen for forever really. And they do have some use. They can look at, sometimes you look at a report like that and something may leap off the page and say, wow, that's something interesting. We need to find out more about that. But the reports are usually, they are static. They sit there, and you have to do a lot of work on your own to be able to dig into. And that's why I represent these things. I just my own graphic with a tombstone, because I call them tombstone reports. So your RIP, your data lies over here. That is essentially descriptive analytics. Moving up the chain, we have what's called diagnostic analytics, and this is getting you from the what to the why. So you may be, say, let's look at the example of the patient census by week, and you're seeing, and say over time you're seeing that one week you had a big dip in patient census. So in a diagnostic analytics, you're able to click onto that week and drill into that data. This is where you get into drill down. This is where you get into some rudimentary data discovery and data mining, and you can get information as to, okay, I had something happen in this data. Why did it happen? So if I had a drop in patients in a certain hospital, I may look into and then find out, oh, I had a floor of the hospital was closed for some reason, or there were several rooms that were put out of service for some reason, or there was some other type of a occurrence. Maybe I had short staff that day, and we couldn't support them. Maybe it was just that there were fewer patients coming in. There are a lot of possibilities there. But when you have a report that supports that kind of drill down capability, it will give you some indication that this is an area to look at, which is why I use the term of needle in a haystack. So you may see a blizzard of data that inside that blizzard is a kernel of information that you might find useful to be able to do. You see this a lot in what are called dashboards. And you're seeing this, and you see this delivered through systems such as either Tableau or Business Objects or Click or Power BI. If you've heard of any of those tools, they will deliver you dashboards that can give you that kind of information. There are tons. If you're interested in following COVID data, there's tons of dashboards out there that would give you data down to the zip code, where you can see different metrics around COVID. If you're looking for elections data, you can find voter data that goes down to the state, to the legislative district, to the county, to different areas. Sometimes you can get them by ward and precinct. You can drill in, you can see historical trends, and you can see you start to get the data start to tell you a story. And this is probably one of the faster growing parts of analytics, because the tools are getting much better in terms of being able to deliver this. And next we have predictive analytics, and I imagine most people have heard this term before. And this is essentially you're going to take information from your existing data, and you're going to use that to inform future outcomes and trends. Now, what does all that mean? Essentially, you're going to take your existing data, you're going to see that, and this is usually involving some type of statistical modeling, either linear or logistic regression, or some type of regression model where you are assigning different risk scores to different events. And so here you have a scene, for example, from the movie Titanic, where the officer is yelling out "iceberg" right ahead, because his information has told them there's an iceberg in front of the ship. You better turn the wheel. And the message from predictive analytics is the same issue. You either have an opportunity where you may have a prediction which indicates you have more of your client prospects are receptive to a certain product line. So that gives you an opportunity of a potential new product to go into. Or if you're a hospital, you may have a situation, you may be rating your patients by risk of what's called an adverse event. So say, for example, on one of the issues in a hospital that they have to be careful of is patient falls. And if a patient falls in a hospital, it's a very serious event. It's never mind the fact you could have serious bodily injury from that, especially if you have someone who's elderly, who's very fragile. You also have liability issues and everything else. And there are many systems now within healthcare that will give a risk rating to a patient in terms of what their fall risk is and this is again using existing data they have, say, based upon based upon prior diagnoses. If they've had a diagnosis of stroke, for example, they're at risk for a fall. If they've had if they've had a diagnosis of dizziness, or otherwise known as syncope, they're at risk for a fall. And the reason why this is important is that if you're a nurse, say you're a nurse manager on the floor, and say on any one given night you have a patient who's at risk for falling, those patients require additional help if they need to move about at all. If they were to get up and go to use the bathroom on their own, they're at risk for falling, and that's a situation you can't have. So when those people need that kind of assistance, you need someone there for them. So say on any given night you have one patient who's a fall risk. You want to know who that person might be. Well, say some Thursday night, just for luck of the draw, instead of having one patient who's a fall risk, you have 7. So that night, the nurse manager on that floor is going to want to know that information, because they're going to need to be able to put their hand up and say, we need more help tonight. Because if we don't have more help, we are at risk for something bad happening. And that's how predictive analytics can help you turn the wheel before you hit the iceberg. Next, we have prescriptive analytics. And this is using algorithms to suggest options. So this is essentially taking predictive analytics one step further, where it is in the previous model you had the person shouting out the iceberg, and that's the predictive analytics. Prescriptive analytics is, there's an iceberg ahead, recommend you you change your course to the right by 30 degrees and you slow down 10 knots. So that could be that's getting into prescriptive. It's making a prescriptive action. And then finally, we have cognitive analytics, which is where you are combining data not only from your own systems but from outside systems, and this allows you to not only suggest improvements, but it also makes improvements in its own suggestions over time, as it is essentially learning over time. So some examples of cognitive analytics used in today include Microsoft's Cortana, Apple's Siri, and IBM's Watson. Those of you who have an iPhone, you've probably used Siri for different things, and you find that Siri gets more and more intelligent as time goes on, as it learns the different things that you're all trying to do. So this is getting into more of the cutting edge of what analytics is able to do for you. So, and these all have different types of use cases, again based upon the foundational, leading, and transformational maturity that I mentioned. So in terms of managing costs, you could have figured, so if you're managing your costs of goods, if you're at a basic level or even a foundational level, you may not be able to determine your cost of goods or your cost of care due to inconsistencies. As you move along, you start to identify data elements. You start to develop predictive models that can identify cost variations, and you can then get to models that may predict certain actions based upon those cost variations. In terms of revenue, if you're a healthcare system, you may have patients who aren't coming to you anymore. They're seeking their care elsewhere. It's called leakage. And if you're at a very basic level, you may not be able to see that, or you may not be able to understand that. And as you move along the progression there, you're able to understand the areas which may be the sources of that, and then be able to take action based upon what you see as information in front of you. If you're marketing, you may be managing a sales funnel. And if you're at a basic level, you may have poor conversion rates based upon which is giving you financial loss. And then if you're moving to foundational, you can have you're seeing that there are coding errors which are causing mischaracterizations of customers as they're in different parts of your funnel. As you're moving to higher levels of maturity, you can get into campaigns that are optimized to respond to your customer needs and models to predict your actions. And then you get and begin back in telehealth for healthcare, telehealth assignment of patients. Telehealth is an emerging area. You may have patients who are who aren't given access to telehealth who probably should be, or they're being assigned inconsistently. And then as you're able to improve that, you're able to get patients on telehealth who are in the appropriate risk file to take best advantage of it. And then finally, again, in the healthcare area, we have what's called population health. And population health is a key component of cost control within healthcare and alternate payment models. So if you have readmission rates too high in a hospital system, and that's going to put you into a bad spot from a population health perspective, but you can identify patients and then categorize them based upon their level of risk for generating a readmission, and then be able to alter your workflows accordingly to be able to work with those patients to help them avoid that. And this is also getting into getting access to what is the patient's circumstance. Are they able to take advantage of the services you are offering? And this is where and then as you get into more advanced stages, you start linking into what's called social determinants of health, where you can see some of the real world obstacles patients may be having to doing what you ask them to be able to do. So we've always wanted to be able to predict the future, and I wanted to talk a little bit about predictive analytics, because that's a lot of what people are talking about these days. So predictive analytics has actually been around a lot longer than folks realize. So I asked people, what is it something that everybody uses to predict the future? And the answer is a weather report. A weather report is one of the foundational pieces of predictive analytics, because it is giving you some information based upon current data. It's giving you information as to what you think may happen in the future, whether that be tomorrow, whether that be 3 hours from now, whether it be tomorrow, whether it be 5 days from now, a week from now. So your weather can be like this, it can be like that, it can be like this, or if you're in New England, it can be like that. And how do you know what's going to be? And the problem with predicting items in the future, and this is going back to the weather report. We've all complained about weather reports in the past. I know I certainly have. And it is a be careful what you wish for scenario, because if you predict an event that is going to happen, well, what if you're wrong? What if you're predicting something and something is not going to happen and it does, or something is going to happen and it doesn't? We had a major storm here last week. I didn't pay attention to the weather report. As a result, I ended up with a tree on my car because I wasn't paying attention to it. So if you're wrong, you may take an action you don't need to take. So say, for example, you have a weather report for a snow day, and all the schools close, and then that morning it's bright, the sunshine, and no one has to go to school. And so we have parents who are grumbling because they had to stay home from work, and even post COVID, they had to stay home from work because the schools were closed, even though they didn't have to be. Or you might bring extra people into work when you don't need to. Say you have a prediction of higher than normal customer demand, and it doesn't materialize that day. Or on the other side, you might miss something that you should have seen. So you don't evacuate while on the path of a hurricane. Or in my case, you don't put the car in the garage when there's a threat of a nor'easter and I end up with a tree in my car. So those are you miss something that you should have seen. Or in healthcare, you don't identify a patient who is a fall risk and they fall. So these are all things that are potential benefits and pitfalls for predicting future events. And one of the key components of that in being able to do this is to have good solid data and good solid management of your data elements and of your data metrics. Now, we've all had issues with weather where things haven't quite worked out, and we've complained. Even in my situation with my car, the car is going to get fixed. There wasn't anybody in it. It wasn't any kind of injury, so it wasn't that huge of an issue. But there have been times when there was. I'm going to give you an example of when a weather report literally changed history, and the outcome of that weather report had a massive impact on the course of history. And this is June 6, 1944. This is World War II. And what was happening then was we had the Allied invasion of Normandy in France, and this was the start of the Allied offensive into France and ultimately into Germany that brought the Second World War to an end. And this was the largest seaborne invasion ever planned and mounted in human history, before or since. But there was a problem in terms of getting these troops across. What was happening here was the people were coming across to from England onto the beaches at Normandy in northwestern France. But the problem was that there was severe weather on the English Channel, and it was a massive storm came through, and it could have canceled everything. Now, the problem with getting troops across in that situation is that you have to get them in at certain tides, and so as a result, you have what's called a window that you can use to get your troops across. And if they had too long of a delay, if the weather created too long of a delay, they would have had to put off an entire month to be able to get them ashore, and that was causing them serious problems. So you had one British meteorologist went through his information and convinced General Eisenhower that the weather was actually going to clear enough to get the troops ashore. So what happened was this was using weather forecasting technology that really was one step past look out a window. There was no satellites, there was no GPS, there was no weather channel, there was nothing of that kind. We had a tiny fraction of the technology that is available now, and based upon that information, General Eisenhower committed 1.1 million troops to the invasion of Europe, approximately the population of modern-day Philadelphia, by the way. And if that forecast was wrong, then the entire course of history might have been changed. The entire invasion might have in fact floundered on the English Channel if in fact they had left and the weather had not cleared at the time that they had. So this was a real gut check moment in terms of working with something which may be predicting the future. So I want to move on now to talk about to give you some examples of analytics use cases. And first of all, what is a use case? It is a term that you hear a lot, but it is not always understood. So what is a use case? And it is technical speak, and it is not technical speak. It describes a sequence of actions that provides value to a user or to an organization. It is essentially describing a problem and how you wish to address that problem. So each use case has got three major components to it. It has an actor, which could be the system user. This could either be a single person or a group of people who are interacting with some kind of process. It has a goal. What is the outcome that you are looking for? What does success look like? I'm working with a couple within my company right now where we're doing some reporting systems, and a key component of that is to being able to determine what success looks like. And then finally, you have the system itself. So it's the process and the steps needed to reach that goal, and whatever requirements are going to be needed, and whatever behaviors are going to be needed out of that system. That is essentially what a use case is. So to that end, I wanted to move on to the online discussion for this week, and I want you to describe a use case for 3 of the 5 types of analytics described in this session, and I want you to include the pros and cons of each of those use cases. So that's your discussion for this week. So I want to thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the discussions, and I will talk to you next week.